The text message arrived at 9:17 p.m. 3 words. I'm still okay. Anyone else would have glanced at it and moved on, but I nearly dropped my coffee. Because 30 years earlier, sitting at a cheap diner outside Fort Bragg, I had taught my little sister exactly what those words meant. If she was safe, she would write, I'm doing okay. If she was being watched, controlled, or forced to pretend everything was fine, she would write, I'm still okay. One word. That was the difference. One word meant trouble. One word meant she needed help. One word meant I had 15 minutes to decide whether I was overreacting or whether my sister was in danger. 15 minutes later, I was already driving toward her house. And for the first time in 20 years, I was using skills I thought I'd left behind when I retired from the military. My brother-in-law had always thought I was just his quiet, gentle sister-in-law. He was about to learn how wrong he was. I retired from the army at 56. 20 years in uniform had taught me many things, but perhaps the most important lesson was knowing when not to talk about myself. A surprising number of people spend their lives trying to impress strangers. I never saw the point. After retirement, I moved into a small house outside Richmond, Virginia. It wasn't fancy. The front porch needed repainting. The flower beds constantly fought against the weeds. The mailbox leaned slightly to the left no matter how many times I fixed it. I loved every inch of it. Most mornings I woke before sunrise, made coffee, and sat on the porch listening to birds wake up. Nobody there knew much about my past. To them, I was simply Sarah Mitchell, a quiet woman who liked gardening, a widow who volunteered at the animal shelter, a woman who baked peach cobbler for church fundraisers. I preferred it that way. The army had already taken enough years of my life. I didn't need to carry it into every conversation. My younger sister Emily lived about 40 minutes away. She was 4 years younger than me, and had always been the softer one between us. When we were children, I climbed trees. Emily picked flowers. I got into fights. Emily apologized for them. I joined the military. Emily became a school librarian. Yet somehow we had always remained close, especially after our parents passed away. For years, every Sunday became our tradition. Lunch together. Coffee afterward. A few hours talking about nothing important. Those afternoons meant more to me than I ever admitted. Emily married Kevin Brooks 8 years earlier. At first I liked him. Most people did. Kevin was charming when he wanted to be. He shook hands firmly, remembered birthdays, told funny stories at barbecues, helped neighbors move furniture. The kind of man people described as a good guy. But charm can hide many things. The first time I noticed something strange was about 3 years into their marriage. Emily stopped making decisions. Not openly. Not dramatically. Just little things. I'd ask where she wanted to eat. She'd look at Kevin first. I'd ask if she wanted to visit me for a weekend. She'd check with Kevin. I'd ask what movie she wanted to see. Kevin answered for her. At first I convinced myself I was imagining it. Then the pattern continued. Year after year. Little pieces of my sister seemed to disappear. One Sunday afternoon while Emily was in the kitchen, Kevin sat across from me on their patio. He took a sip of beer and laughed. You know, Sarah, I don't think you've ever had a real job. I smiled. Really? Sure. He gestured toward the flower beds. You've always seemed pretty relaxed. I nearly laughed. I'd spent years sleeping in tents, surviving desert heat, managing soldiers, and making life or death decisions. But I simply said, that's one way to look at it. Kevin chuckled. I mean, Emily's the strong one. She's always been the responsible one. I watched him carefully. Not because his words offended me. Because of the way he said them. There was something beneath the joke. Something dismissive. Something that suggested he enjoyed underestimating people. Especially women. After that, similar comments became common. Sarah's too nice for the real world. Sarah doesn't understand business. Sarah worries too much. Sarah spends all day with flowers and dogs. Emily usually looked uncomfortable when he spoke that way, but she never challenged him. That bothered me more than Kevin's comments ever could. The sister I grew up with wasn't afraid of speaking her mind. The woman sitting beside him seemed afraid of something. I just couldn't figure out what. Over the next 2 years, the changes became harder to ignore. Emily stopped answering calls immediately. She rarely went anywhere alone. Her social circle shrank. Friends stopped visiting. Family gatherings became less frequent. When I asked if everything was okay, she always smiled. Always. The exact same smile. The smile people wear when they don't want to discuss the truth. One afternoon while helping her clean the garage, I noticed bruising near her wrist. My stomach tightened. What happened? She immediately pulled down her sleeve. Nothing. Emily. I bumped into a shelf. The answer came too quickly. Too rehearsed. I didn't push further. Not then. Pressure often makes frightened people retreat. Years of leadership had taught me that. Instead, I stayed patient, observed, waited. Months passed. Then one evening nearly 30 years after we first created it, our old emergency code returned. Back when I was a young Army officer, Emily worried about me constantly. She worried during deployments. She worried during training exercises. She worried whenever she couldn't reach me. So I created a simple communication system. If one of us ever needed help but couldn't ask directly, we'd use specific phrases. It was meant as a joke, a sisterly game, something we'd probably never need, or so we thought. For decades, neither of us used it. Until that night. At 9:17 p.m., my phone buzzed. A text from Emily. I'm still okay. Nothing else. No emoji. No explanation. No follow-up. Just 3 words. I stared at the screen. Every instinct inside me woke up. People often imagine military training as weapons, tactics, or combat. They're wrong. The most valuable skill I learned was recognizing patterns. And when patterns suddenly change, pay attention. Emily hadn't accidentally sent that message. She had chosen every word. Carefully. Deliberately. For a long moment I sat in silence. The coffee in my hand grew cold. Outside, the evening air had become still. Then I opened my contacts. Not to call Emily. Not yet. Because if she was being watched, calling could make things worse. Instead, I began gathering information. The way I'd been trained to do for 20 years. Slowly. Methodically. Without panic. Without assumptions. Within minutes, I already knew one thing for certain. Something was very wrong. And for the first time in years, I had the unmistakable feeling that my sister was asking me to come find her. Part 2, the distress code. The first rule of crisis response is simple. Don't let fear make decisions for you. The second rule is even more important. Gather facts before taking action. I repeated both rules silently as I set my coffee aside and moved into my home office. Most people would probably assume that after retirement, military habits disappear. They don't. Not the useful ones. The discipline stays with you. The ability to remain calm stays with you. The instinct to evaluate situations objectively stays with you. Within 60 seconds, I had a legal pad on my desk, a pen, my laptop open, and a timeline already forming in my head. 9:17 p.m. Message received. I'm still okay. The phrase itself wasn't enough to tell me exactly what was happening, but it told me something crucial. Emily believed she couldn't speak freely. That narrowed the possibilities considerably. I wrote down every interaction we'd had over the previous month. Every phone call. Every visit. Every unusual detail. The process felt familiar, not because I was conducting some dramatic investigation, because I was looking for patterns. Patterns reveal truths that emotions often miss. The first thing that stood out was how little I had actually spoken to Emily recently. 3 years earlier, we talked almost daily. Now sometimes 4 or 5 days passed between conversations. At the time, I'd blamed life, schedules, age, responsibilities. Now I wasn't so sure. I scrolled through our text history. An uncomfortable realization settled in my stomach. Nearly every conversation ended abruptly. Nearly every phone call lasted less than 10 minutes, and almost every weekend visit had been canceled by Kevin. Not Emily. Kevin. I underlined his name several times. Then I picked up my phone. My first call wasn't to the police. It wasn't to Emily. It wasn't even to Kevin. It was to a woman named Diane. Diane lived 2 houses down from Emily. A retired nurse. Friendly. Observant. The kind of neighbor who noticed everything. She answered on the 3rd ring. Sarah, everything okay? I'm not sure. There was a brief pause. What happened? I chose my words carefully. When was the last time you saw Emily? Another pause. Longer this time. That's a strange question. When was it? Diane sighed. A few days ago. How did she seem? Silence. Then another sigh. And suddenly I knew. Because people only hesitate like that when they're deciding whether to tell the truth. Not good, Diane finally said. My grip tightened around the phone. What do you mean? I don't know exactly. Tell me anyway. Diane lowered her voice. I've heard them fighting. I stared out the window. The night suddenly felt colder. How often? More lately. Physical? I don't know. That answer sounded honest. She wasn't exaggerating. She wasn't guessing. She simply didn't know. What kind of fighting? Kevin yelling. My jaw tightened. Emily, mostly crying. I closed my eyes for a moment. Years ago during deployment briefings, we'd often discuss indicators. One indicator alone meant little. Several indicators together created a pattern, and I was beginning to see one. Anything else? I asked. Actually, Diane hesitated again. What? I haven't seen Emily driving lately. That caught my attention. Emily loved driving. Always had. Road trips. Weekend bookstore runs. Coffee shop visits. Driving represented freedom to her. How long? Maybe 2 months. 2 months? I wrote it down immediately. Anything else? Another pause. Kevin fired their housekeeper. When? About 3 weeks ago. That was odd. Emily had arthritis in both knees. The housekeeper helped because some tasks had become difficult. Why would Kevin suddenly eliminate that support? Unless isolation was the goal. My military career taught me something uncomfortable about control. People who seek control rarely start with dramatic acts. They start small. Remove support systems. Limit independence. Restrict communication. Gradually narrow someone's world. By the time outsiders notice, the damage is often significant. When I ended the call, I sat quietly for several moments. Not because I was shocked. Because I wasn't. Deep down, I'd been worried for years. Now evidence was simply catching up to instinct. I checked the time. 9:31 p.m. 14 minutes since the text arrived. I opened social media. Emily hadn't posted anything in weeks. That wasn't normal. She loved books, libraries, photos of her garden. There was always something. Now there was nothing. Next, I checked a neighborhood community page. Several recent posts mentioned Kevin. Not directly. Indirectly. One neighbor complained about loud arguments. Another mentioned police being called somewhere on the street several weeks earlier. No names listed. Still, more pieces. More patterns. More reasons to worry. Then something else occurred to me. I opened a folder containing family documents. Birthdays. Addresses. Emergency contacts. Years earlier, Emily had given me access to several things in case of emergencies. Most people never think about emergency planning until they need it. Military families think differently. Preparation becomes second nature. One file contained contact information for Emily's physician. Another listed medications. Everything appeared normal. Then I noticed something missing. A recent update wasn't there. Emily usually updated everything meticulously. The absence bothered me. Small details matter. Especially when someone who is habitually organized suddenly stops being organized. At 9:34 p.m. I made a decision. I would drive to her house. Not tomorrow. Not in the morning. Now. Before leaving, I sent one carefully worded text. Not to Emily. To Kevin. Just enough to establish a baseline. Just enough to see how he responded. Thinking about stopping by tomorrow. Hope you both are doing well. The reply came less than a minute later. Too fast. Almost as if he'd been staring at his phone. We're fine. No mention of Emily. No greeting. No warmth. Just 2 words. We're fine. Not she's fine. Not Emily says hello. We're fine. Control often reveals itself in language. I had seen that pattern before. Many times. I grabbed my keys, my purse, a lightweight jacket. Then I paused beside the front door. The house was silent. The grandfather clock in my hallway ticked steadily. For a moment I felt the weight of age. Not physical age. Emotional age. The realization that after all these years I might be stepping into another crisis. I had spent decades protecting soldiers, guiding young men and women through dangerous situations, helping families through difficult phone calls. I thought that chapter of my life had ended. Apparently not. As I locked the door behind me, the night air felt cool against my face. The drive normally took 40 minutes. I covered it in 32. Not because I sped recklessly. Because my mind had already shifted into operational mode. Observe, assess, respond. The familiar rhythm returned effortlessly. By the time I reached Emily's neighborhood, most houses were dark. Porch lights glowed softly. Sprinklers clicked somewhere in the distance. Everything appeared peaceful. Too peaceful. I parked half a block away. Old habits. I wanted to observe before announcing my presence. Walking slowly along the sidewalk, I studied the house. Lights were on downstairs. One upstairs. The garage was closed. No obvious signs of disturbance. No police. No ambulance. No visible emergency. To anyone else it looked perfectly normal. Then I reached the side yard. And froze. Through a narrow gap between curtains I could see part of the living room. Emily was sitting on the couch. Her shoulders were trembling. She was crying. And standing near the doorway was Kevin, watching her. Not comforting her. Not speaking. Just watching. Then he walked to the front door, checked the lock, and locked it again. My heartbeat slowed. Not faster. Slower. The way it always did when a situation became clear. Because uncertainty had just become certainty. Emily hadn't imagined the danger. And neither had I. Something was very wrong inside that house. And for the first time that night I stopped wondering whether my sister needed help. Now I needed to figure out exactly how to get her out. Part 3. The man who didn't know who he was dealing with. For nearly a minute I remained in the shadows beside the hedge watching the living room window. Emily sat motionless on the couch. Kevin paced. Back and forth. Back and forth. Every movement carried the same restless energy I'd seen many times before. Not in family homes, in command briefings, in disciplinary hearings, in rooms where people knew they were losing control and were desperately trying to regain it. The difference was that soldiers eventually accepted accountability. People like Kevin usually didn't. I watched him stop beside Emily. He said something. I couldn't hear the words through the glass, but I saw her shoulders tighten. Then she nodded, a small defeated nod. Kevin walked away again. The sight made something twist inside my chest. Not anger, not yet, sadness. Because I remembered who Emily used to be. The woman sitting on that couch wasn't the sister who had once driven 6 hours through a snowstorm to help me move into my first apartment. She wasn't the woman who organized community literacy programs. She wasn't the woman who could make an entire room laugh with one perfectly timed joke. This Emily looked smaller, like someone who had spent years apologizing for simply existing. I had seen it happen before. Control changes people, not overnight, slowly. One concession at a time, one compromise at a time. One humiliation at a time, until they no longer recognize themselves. I stepped away from the window and walked toward the front porch. No more observation. It was time to make contact. The porch light illuminated the front steps as I climbed them. Then I rang the bell. Inside movement stopped immediately. 10 seconds passed, then 20. The door finally opened. Kevin stood there wearing jeans and a gray polo shirt. For a brief second, surprise flashed across his face. Then the familiar smile appeared. The one he used whenever he wanted to look charming. Sarah, I smiled politely. Evening. What are you doing here? I was in the area. That was obviously a lie. We both knew it. His smile tightened slightly. At 10 o'clock at night, I wanted to check on Emily. She's fine. There it was again. Not let me get her. Not come inside. Not ask her yourself. Just a statement. She's fine. I looked past him toward the living room. I'd still like to see her. Kevin shifted his weight. A tiny movement. Most people wouldn't notice. I did, because hesitation often reveals more than words. She's tired. I'm sure she can decide that herself. The smile disappeared entirely, only for a second, but it disappeared. Then Emily appeared in the hallway. When she saw me, something flickered across her face. Relief, not excitement, not surprise. Relief. That told me everything. Sarah. Her voice sounded strained. I immediately noticed several things. Red eyes, swollen eyelids, a faint bruise near her wrist, and something even more troubling. She wouldn't look directly at Kevin, not for more than a second. People don't avoid eye contact with someone they trust. Not repeatedly, not instinctively. I was worried about you, I said. Emily opened her mouth, then glanced toward Kevin, then looked back at me. I'm okay. The words sounded rehearsed, the same way her smile looked rehearsed, the same way everything about this interaction felt rehearsed. Kevin stepped slightly forward, not enough to be obvious. Just enough to insert himself between us. You see, he said, everything's fine. I looked directly at him. I wasn't talking to you. The silence that followed lasted perhaps 2 seconds. It felt much longer. Kevin blinked. Emily looked stunned. Apparently nobody had spoken to him that way in a while. Interesting. I turned back toward my sister. Can I come in? Another glance toward Kevin. Another hesitation. Then she nodded. Sure. Kevin clearly wanted to refuse, but doing so would look suspicious. Even he understood that. Reluctantly, he stepped aside. The moment I entered the house, my instincts became louder. Not because of anything dramatic, because of small things. Very small things. The kind most people overlook. A security camera mounted in the corner of the living room. Another pointed toward the kitchen. One near the hallway. Too many cameras for a normal home, especially indoors. The furniture arrangement had changed. Emily's reading chair was gone. Her bookshelves had been reduced by half. Family photographs were missing from several walls. Instead, framed motivational quotes hung in their place. Control, control, control. Everywhere I looked, I saw evidence of it. We sat in the living room. Kevin chose the chair nearest Emily, not beside her, near her, positioning himself like a guard. I spent the next 20 minutes making conversation. Nothing confrontational, nothing dramatic. The weather, church events, neighborhood gossip. The entire time I watched and listened. More importantly, I watched what Kevin did. Every question directed at Emily received the same response. She started answering. Kevin interrupted. She offered an opinion. Kevin corrected it. She told a story. Kevin finished it for her. Again, and again, and again. Eventually, I deliberately tested something. Emily, are you still volunteering at the library on Thursdays? Before she could answer, Kevin spoke. Not anymore. I kept my eyes on my sister. I asked Emily. The room became very quiet. Emily stared down at her hands. Kevin leaned back slowly. His jaw tightened. And suddenly I understood something important. He wasn't worried about me. He was annoyed by me. To Kevin, I wasn't a threat. I was simply an inconvenience. A nosy older sister. A retired woman with flowers in her yard. Someone he assumed he could dismiss. The arrogance was almost impressive. After another 10 minutes I stood. I should get going. Emily looked disappointed. That hurt more than I expected. Because it told me she didn't want me to leave. Kevin practically escorted me toward the door. Not rudely. Just eagerly. As we reached the porch I turned toward Emily. Could you help me carry something to my car? Kevin answered instantly. What? I smiled. A box of books. There are no books, I shrugged. Then help me carry the imaginary books. For the first time all evening, Emily almost smiled. Almost. And because refusing would seem ridiculous, Kevin reluctantly allowed it. The moment we stepped outside alone, I spoke quietly. How bad is it? Emily's face collapsed. Not dramatically. Just enough. Enough for me to see the truth. Tears filled her eyes immediately. Oh God, that was all she said. 2 words. But they carried years of exhaustion. I took her hand gently. He hurts you. She shook her head, then hesitated, then nodded. Not physically often, but enough. Enough. The answer landed like a stone inside my chest. How long? Her voice cracked. 2 years. 2 years. My sister had been living in fear for 2 years. And I hadn't known. The guilt hit hard. Harder than anger. Harder than outrage. Because every older sibling believes they'll protect the younger one, no matter how old they become. And somehow I had missed this. He controls everything, she whispered. My phone. My money. My schedule. My stomach tightened. What do you need from me? She looked directly into my eyes. For the first time that night. For the first time in years, perhaps. And I saw the old Emily. The brave Emily. The sister I remembered? I need a way out. I squeezed her hand. You have one. A car door slammed somewhere down the street. We both looked up. Time was running out. I leaned closer. Listen carefully. She nodded. Tomorrow. Documents. Financial records. Bank statements. Medical records. Anything important. Make copies. Hide them. Then call me. Can you do that? Emily inhaled shakily. Yes. Good. The answer sounded stronger than anything she'd said all evening. Before returning to the house, she stopped me. Sarah, what? Her eyes searched mine. Why aren't you scared of him? I almost laughed. Not because the question was funny. Because the answer was simple. For 20 years I had dealt with crises, emergencies, and people who thought intimidation made them powerful. Kevin wasn't special. He was just another bully, one who had finally chosen the wrong target. I smiled gently. Because I've handled people much worse than Kevin. Then I walked away. Behind me the front door opened. And I knew something Kevin didn't. The moment Emily asked for help, he had already lost. Part 4. The perfect ambush. The biggest mistake people make when dealing with a controlling person is believing the confrontation itself is the victory. It isn't. The confrontation is simply the moment the truth becomes visible. The real victory happens beforehand, quietly, patiently, piece by piece. Over the next 3 weeks I spoke to Emily almost every day. Not through normal phone calls. Not at first. Kevin monitored those. Instead, we used methods that would have seemed ridiculous to anyone else. Emails hidden inside book recommendations. Messages tucked into online library requests. Short notes passed through trusted friends. Nothing illegal. Nothing dramatic. Just enough communication to stay connected while keeping Kevin unaware. The entire time I followed the same principle that had guided me throughout my military career. Never move faster than your intelligence. Gather information first. Act second. The evidence accumulated quickly. Far more quickly than I expected. By the end of the first week I understood something disturbing. Kevin wasn't simply controlling. He was desperate. And desperate people make mistakes. Lots of them. Emily began copying documents whenever she could. Bank statements, credit card records, insurance paperwork, property documents, everything. One afternoon she called from a grocery store parking lot. Her voice trembled. Sarah, what happened? I found another account. I sat up immediately. What kind of account? A savings account, in both names. No. The silence that followed was enough. Kevin had hidden it. For years. The balance contained nearly $160,000. Money Emily knew nothing about. Money accumulated while Kevin repeatedly claimed they couldn't afford vacations. Couldn't afford repairs. Couldn't afford retirement planning. Couldn't afford basic things Emily wanted. The discovery changed everything. Because financial abuse leaves a paper trail. And paper trails don't lie. A few days later, another piece surfaced. Then another. Then another. By the second week, we had documentation showing Kevin had quietly transferred funds between accounts for years. Not illegally. Not quite. But deceptively. Very deceptively. Every new document strengthened Emily. I could hear it in her voice. The woman who had once whispered now spoke more confidently. The woman who constantly apologized now asked questions. Important questions, strategic questions, questions about lawyers, questions about housing, questions about rebuilding her life. The old Emily was slowly returning. And Kevin had no idea. One evening she called me while sitting inside her car. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Were you ever afraid in the army?" I smiled. "What kind of question is that?" "A serious one." I considered it carefully, then answered honestly. "Every good leader gets scared." "Really?" "Of course." "What makes them different?" I looked out my kitchen window. The sun was setting beyond the trees. Orange light painted the yard. "They move forward anyway." For several seconds she said nothing. Then I heard her exhale. A long breath. The kind people release when they're finally beginning to believe in themselves again. "Okay." "Okay, what?" "I'm ready." That was the moment I knew. Not that we'd won, but that Emily was no longer trapped mentally. The emotional prison was cracking, and once that happens, the rest becomes possible. The following Monday, I drove her to meet an attorney. A woman named Rebecca Turner, mid-60s, sharp, experienced, absolutely fearless. After reviewing the documents, Rebecca removed her glasses and leaned back. "How much does your husband know?" Emily shook her head. "Nothing." Rebecca smiled. Good. I had seen that smile before. It was the smile professionals wear when they realize the facts are stronger than they expected. For nearly 2 hours, Rebecca reviewed evidence. Financial records, medical reports, photographs, emails, witness statements, everything. When the meeting ended, she looked directly at Emily. "You have options." Emily's eyes filled with tears, not from sadness. Relief. Pure relief. Because for years Kevin had convinced her she had none. That was how he maintained control. Not through strength. Through hopelessness. Once hope returns, control begins to crumble. The final piece arrived unexpectedly. And ironically, Kevin provided it himself. 3 days later, Emily discovered evidence of an affair. At first, she didn't want to investigate. She almost ignored it. Then she remembered something I'd told young officers years earlier. Truth doesn't become less true because you avoid it. So she looked, and found everything. Messages, hotel receipts, photographs, months of deception. When she showed me the evidence, I wasn't shocked. Men like Kevin often believe rules apply only to other people. The discovery wasn't emotionally satisfying. It was strategically useful. Very useful, Rebecca agreed. By the beginning of the 4th week, everything was ready. The documents, the filings, the financial protections, the relocation plan. Every detail carefully arranged. Now we simply needed the right moment. Kevin gave us that too. His birthday party. A large gathering at a local country club. Friends, co-workers, neighbors. Dozens of guests. The perfect audience. I almost laughed when Emily told me. For years, Kevin had carefully managed appearances. He cared deeply about image, reputation, status. The party represented everything he valued, which made it the perfect location. The evening arrived warm and clear. The country club buzzed with conversation. Champagne glasses clinked. Music drifted through the ballroom. People laughed, smiled, celebrated. Kevin loved every second of it. I watched from across the room as he moved between groups, shaking hands, telling stories, playing the role of successful husband, successful professional, successful man. Nobody else knew the performance was ending. At one point he raised a glass. "Thank you all for coming." Applause followed. More smiles, more laughter. Then he wrapped an arm around Emily, a gesture that looked affectionate, until you noticed how tense she became. "I couldn't have done any of this without my wife." More applause. Then came the line that made my stomach turn. "She's not going anywhere." Several guests laughed. Emily didn't. Neither did I. Because he meant it. And he believed it. That was the problem. He genuinely believed she belonged to him. A few moments later, Rebecca entered the room. She wore a navy suit and carried a thin leather folder. Nothing dramatic. Nothing theatrical. Just business. I saw Kevin notice her. Confusion crossed his face. Then concern. Then uncertainty. Interesting. Perhaps some part of him already knew. Rebecca approached calmly. Emily stepped forward. The room gradually became quieter. People sensed something was happening. Conversation slowed. Heads turned. Kevin looked between them. "What is this?" Rebecca opened the folder. Emily accepted several documents. Then she handed them directly to her husband. The silence became absolute. Kevin stared down at the papers. His face lost color. Not all at once. Gradually, like someone watching a storm approach. No. One word, barely audible. No. Again, louder. Emily stood perfectly still. For the first time since I'd arrived, she looked completely calm, completely free. Kevin's eyes moved rapidly across the pages. Divorce petition, financial disclosures, legal notices, everything. The reality finally reached him. The control was gone. The secrets were exposed. The future he assumed belonged to him had disappeared. His gaze snapped toward me. Across the ballroom. Across dozens of stunned guests. Across years of arrogance. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded. Several people looked shocked. I wasn't. I had been waiting for that question, not because I needed recognition, but because it revealed something important. After 8 years in the family, Kevin still didn't know me. Not really. He never bothered. He saw what he wanted to see. A quiet woman. A retired gardener. A harmless older sister. Nothing more. I met his stare calmly. Then smiled. "The person you should have been worried about from the beginning." The room remained silent, and for the first time all evening, Kevin looked afraid. Part 5, 20 years of service and the final lesson. Fear changes people. Sometimes it makes them run. Sometimes it makes them fight. And sometimes, when a person has spent years believing they control everything, fear makes them unravel right in front of everyone. That night at the country club, I watched Kevin begin to unravel. At first he tried anger. That was predictable. People like Kevin almost always start with anger because it feels powerful. He threw the documents onto a nearby table. "This is ridiculous." Nobody responded. He looked at Emily, then at Rebecca, then at me. His voice rose another level. "She's lying." Still nobody responded. The silence around him grew heavier. Because the truth has a strange effect on a room. Once enough people recognize it, lies suddenly sound much louder than they used to. The guests weren't hearing a confident husband anymore. They were hearing a desperate man. And they knew the difference. Kevin took a step toward Emily. For a brief second I saw the old pattern return. The intimidation. The pressure. The expectation that she would shrink back. That she would apologize. That she would surrender. Instead, Emily simply stood there. Calm. Steady. Looking directly into his eyes. The expression on Kevin's face was almost painful to watch. Not because I felt sorry for him. Because he genuinely couldn't understand what was happening. For years he had trained Emily to doubt herself. To second-guess herself. To seek permission. And now suddenly she wasn't doing any of those things. That terrified him. Rebecca calmly gathered the documents from the table. "Mr. Brooks, you've officially been served." Kevin ignored her. His entire focus remained on Emily. "You can't do this," she answered softly. "I already did." It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But it may have been the strongest thing I'd ever heard my sister say. The room remained silent. Then Kevin turned toward me. His eyes narrowed. "This was you." I shrugged. "No." "What?" "This was Emily." He laughed bitterly. Emily could never pull something like this off. The moment the words left his mouth, I saw several guests exchange glances, because there it was. The entire problem. Not the money. Not the affair. Not even the control. It was the fact that Kevin genuinely believed Emily was incapable. That belief had poisoned their marriage from the beginning. Emily heard it too. I could see it in her face. And for the first time she looked almost sad for him. Not frightened. Not angry. Sad. Like someone finally seeing a broken person clearly. The party ended shortly afterward. People left quietly. Some offered support. Others avoided eye contact. A few clearly enjoyed the drama. Human nature never changes. As for Kevin, he stormed out before the evening ended. That would be the last time I saw him socially. The legal process took several months. Longer than Emily wanted. Shorter than Rebecca expected. The reason was simple. Facts. Facts are stubborn things. The financial records existed. The hidden accounts existed. The affair existed. The documentation existed. No amount of outrage could make them disappear. Throughout the proceedings, Kevin continued insisting he was the victim. That wasn't surprising either. Some people build their identities around never being wrong. Admitting fault feels impossible, so they rewrite reality instead. The court wasn't interested in rewritten reality. The court was interested in evidence, and evidence told a very different story. By the time everything concluded, Kevin lost far more than he expected. A substantial portion of his assets, his reputation, several professional opportunities, relationships with people who finally saw him clearly. Most importantly, he lost control. The one thing he valued most. Emily, meanwhile, gained something far more valuable. Freedom. The first time I visited her new apartment, she cried before we even unpacked the first box. Not because she was overwhelmed, because she could finally lock a door and know nobody would demand explanations. She could buy groceries without asking permission. She could call friends without being monitored. She could sit quietly and read a book for 3 hours if she wanted. Simple things. Things most people take for granted. Things she had slowly lost over the years. One afternoon, several months after the divorce was finalized, we sat together on her balcony drinking coffee. The spring air felt warm. Birds moved through the trees. For the first time in a very long while, Emily looked peaceful. Really peaceful. Not the practiced smile she'd worn for years. Real peace. The kind that settles deep in a person's shoulders. The kind that changes how they breathe. She stirred her coffee slowly, then looked at me. "Can I ask you something?" "Always." She smiled. "When did you know?" I already knew what she meant. "When did I know something was wrong?" She nodded. I thought about it for a moment. "The truth." "Please." "I suspected years ago." Her expression fell. "I should have said something." "No." "You should have." I shook my head. "Emily, people leave situations when they're ready." She looked down. "I wasted so much time." I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "No?" "What do you mean?" "You survived." Tears appeared instantly. Because survivors often blame themselves for the years they spent enduring something. They forget how hard survival actually is. They forget how much courage it takes simply to keep going. "I wasn't very brave," she whispered. I smiled. "That's where you're wrong." She looked confused. So I told her something I had learned during 20 years in uniform. People think courage means running toward danger. Sometimes it does. But more often, courage means telling the truth after years of silence. Courage means asking for help. Courage means believing you deserve better. Those things are often harder. Emily wiped her eyes, then laughed softly. "You always know what to say." "No," I smiled. "I've just had more practice." A year later, life looked very different. Emily accepted a leadership position at a literacy nonprofit. She rebuilt friendships, started traveling again, started laughing again. Sometimes I'd catch glimpses of the woman she used to be. Other times I'd see someone entirely new. Someone stronger, someone wiser, someone who had walked through fire and come out the other side. As for Kevin, I heard occasional updates through mutual acquaintances. Nothing dramatic, nothing particularly satisfying, just ordinary consequences, and honestly that felt appropriate. Real life rarely delivers cinematic revenge. It delivers accountability. Slow, steady, unavoidable. One Sunday afternoon, almost exactly a year after that text message arrived, Emily and I sat on my porch watching the sunset. The same porch where I had received her distress code. The same porch where everything had changed. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then she asked the question I had secretly expected. What if I never sent the message? I looked toward the horizon. Orange light spread across the sky. The answer came easily. Because it was true. I would have found you eventually. She laughed through tears, then leaned her head against my shoulder. For a while we simply sat there. Two sisters. Older now. Wiser now. Grateful now. And I realized something. People often assume the most important thing I learned during 20 years in the military was leadership. Or discipline. Or resilience. Those mattered. But the greatest lesson was simpler. Never ignore a quiet cry for help. Because sometimes 3 ordinary words can save someone's life. And sometimes the most important mission you'll ever undertake has nothing to do with serving your country. Sometimes it's bringing your family home. If this story touched your heart, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever known someone who hid their pain behind a smile? Or have you ever found the courage to ask for help when you needed it most? Leave a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. We share stories like this every day. Stories about strength, dignity, family, and second chances. And if you'd like to continue this journey with us, please subscribe so you don't miss the next story. Until next time, take care of yourself and the people you love.